And I found out that many of the translations of the Bible actually translated this passage, the destroyer. They didn't say Abaddon or Apollyon. I have a 26 translation Bible on my desk, and many of the translations said they had a king over them called the destroyer. Well, back in 1991, I was subscribed to the German Tribune at the time, and they had an article on the Gulf crisis. I'm reading the article, and it said, Saddam, quote, the destroyer, Hussein. And I thought, why did they say the destroyer? And I knew this scripture was in there, and I knew what that meant, but I thought, maybe it's a coincidence that they would call him the destroyer. And so I saved the article, but I didn't say anything about it to anybody because I wasn't sure. However, December the 13th of 1997, I received my Jerusalem Post through the mail. My wife was driving me somewhere to speak, and so I took it along to read it as I was going down the highway. There was a story in there, a human interest story. A Jewish family had just escaped from Baghdad in Iraq, one of the very last Jewish families to make it out. And so this lady was telling her story in the Jerusalem Post. It was not a religious article. It was not a prophetic article at all. But she was telling her story. And she was telling everybody that when Saddam Hussein was being carried by his mother during the pregnancy, she had horrible problems, so much so that the doctors recommended an abortion. Saddam's mother did not want to get an abortion, so she suffered through the pregnancy, but she moved into the Jewish sector of Baghdad, and the Jewish doctors helped her through the pregnancy. But when Saddam Hussein was born, she decided to name him Saddam because Saddam means the destroyer. Now that was in the Jerusalem Post. So now I found it in the German Tribune. Now I found it in the Jerusalem Post. And I said, God, how could this be? And then on the next question was, how could it not be? Here you've got sun being hid by the smoke. You've got the locusts, the attack helicopters coming out of the smoke. And you've got a king over them by the name of the destroyer. And Saddam's name literally means the destroyer. And I have pretty well come to conclude that the fifth trumpet sounded in 1991. Does anybody know how many trumpets there are? Does anybody know what happens at the last trump? 1 Corinthians 15. At the last trump, this mortal must put on immortality. This corruption must put on incorruption. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. Don't look now. But if the fifth trumpet has sounded, we got one to go. And then the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout. You want me to give an altar call right now? Okay, well, but there's the sixth trumpet. If the fifth trumpet did sound, and I'll be frank with you, it looks like to me that it in fact did. Now there is a possibility that we are yet in the fifth trumpet era because there's evidence that these are eras. When the seventh trumpet sounds, it said, and in the days when the seventh trumpet began to sound, it's as though it covers a time period. We could yet be in the fifth trumpet time period because we really haven't heard the last of Saddam Hussein yet. He's still causing problems. So if there's anything left in that prophecy to be fulfilled, it may lie just ahead of us because there's still conflict there. But I think we should now look at the sixth trumpet. The sixth trumpet is incredibly interesting. The prophecy of the sixth trumpet is located in Revelations chapter 9, verse 12 through 16. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice saying, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 250,000. and I heard the number of them. Now, this prophecy states that there's a war coming that will be triggered by an army of 200,000, thousands, a million. There's an army of 200 million somewhere that will start a war, and the horrible results of this war will be the slaying of the third part of men. Now, if that literally means what it says, this prophecy says this war will kill 1/3 of the world's population. We have almost 6 billion people on this earth right now, and that's a prophecy that just ahead of us is a war that will kill 2 billion people. I hope it does not touch any of us tonight, but I cannot promise you it won't. The only insurance we have is just be ready. If you're not ready, you need to find out how to get ready, because there's not much time left. If the fifth trumpet has sounded, we got the sixth, which is going to be horrific, the worst war the world has ever seen. 52 million died in World War II. Now this prophecy says 2 billion. Focus for a moment on the fact that there will be 200 million soldiers. Mao Zedong, the late leader of China, boasted in his diary that he could field an army of 200 million. He boasted the exact figure in the Bible. Now, is that a coincidence, or had atheist, communistic leader Mao Zedong been studying the Bible? I don't think he'd probably been studying the Bible. But he inadvertently named the exact number of soldiers that's in that prophecy in Revelation chapter number 9. Now, beyond that, there has never been a nation in the history of the world that had enough population to put 200 million soldiers on the battlefield. We only have 250 million total population in the United States of America right now. And so there had never been a nation in the history of the world that could put 200 million soldiers on the battlefield. However, now Mao Zedong says that he can, because they have 1.2 billion population. So this appears to be a prophecy that China will start a war. And the prophecy says about China that this army was reserved for an hour, a day, a month, and a year. It's like the sleeping giant has sort of been in waiting. Everybody refers to China as the sleeping giant. Don't wake her up. Let me tell you what is happening in China right now. The Chinese economy suddenly began to escalate very rapidly during the latter part of the 70s. As a matter of fact, since 1979, the Chinese economy has increased by an average of 10% per year for the last 20 years. Now, nations today, if you can increase your economy by 2 to 3% per year, that's considered a good year economically. China has increased by 10% per year every year for the last 20 years. Now, this has produced terrific economic surpluses. When you're growing an economy the size of China's by 10% per year, you're producing a lot of economic surpluses. Right now, China sells to us at least $80 billion more per year than we sell to her. So China's pulling $80 billion a year out of the United States of America. That is staggering within itself. What is China doing with all this extra money? Well, she's buying military equipment. And her favorite source of military equipment, believe it or not, is Israel. And Israel needs the money, and so they're selling it to her, and guess where Israel gets her equipment from?